Before we get into the stories, make sure you check out Donovan Dread Discovers, where I go over strange and weird videos from around the world. I release several times a week. Also, sign up for the weekly email at dreadsarmy.com so you don't miss any updates. A couple of years ago, I was working as a park ranger at Devil's Lake State Park in Wisconsin. I loved everything about that gig: the early sunrises, the cool evening breezes, the quiet serenity of nature, and even the occasional wild animal that took a shine to me. You could say I was living my dream, until this one incident. It was a day like any other at first, but it turned quickly to an experience I still can't wrap my head around. My day always started at the crack of dawn. I'd patrol the well-used trails, check the animal tracks, pick up litter left behind by disrespectful tourists. You know, the usual stuff. Being out there in the wilderness, living off the whims of nature and doing my bit to keep her beauty intact. There was no place I'd rather be. It was a simple life, just me and the great outdoors. One day, my routine sugar maple monitoring took me to the brush line off the quartzite trail. It was a regular gig. Examine the trees for any disease, insects, measure the circumferences and all that. This day, however, the second I stepped off the trail, something seemed off. There was this smell, a stench really. All around me the air was thick with it. It was a pungent, heavy odor that I can only describe as a cross between deep earth and rotting garbage. Might not seem that odd in the wild, but it felt different. I would have dismissed it if not for my gut. I've been out in the wilderness long enough to trust my instincts. When nature talks, we should listen. I learned that the hard way, but that's a story for another time. It wasn't the terrible smell that unsettled me as much as the feeling it brought. There was a sense of wrongness, like something had visited that place that didn't belong. It was then I noticed everything was oddly quiet. Devil's Lake isn't a quiet place in my experience. There's always some bird call or rustling leaves, the hum of flowing water, or a critter scrabbling about. The forest is never really silent, but in that instant, I swear, you could have heard a pin drop. The eerie silence I would have normally welcomed was uncharacteristically chilling. In that tranquility, however, I noticed a faint hum. Now, this is going to sound bizarre, but it was like the low buzz you'd hear around those big, old power lines. But this was the wild miles away from civilization, and there were no power lines around. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, but the Forestry Service had its procedures, and I had a job to do. Determined, I hauled my equipment further in, shrugging off these feelings, trying to convince myself it was another day in the park. And that's when I saw them, the trees. They were scarred, some kind of burn marks, all blackened and smoky. But it was just those few trees. None of the others were affected. It was as if something had scorched them. It wasn't like a wildfire. The burn marks were made precisely, methodically, even it wasn't natural. That much was clear. After taking down notes and some pictures of those trees, I looked up at the ridge above, and there was something. It was some sort of figure. Human, perhaps, or maybe something else. It took me a moment to process, but by the time I did, they were gone. Now, I have no way to prove this, and you're welcome to be skeptical. But remember, the wilderness doesn't care for our explanations or lack thereof. I'm not sure what happened that day or what I saw, and I sure don't know if others have experienced it too. But one thing's for certain, there's something else out there besides us. So there I was standing among the damaged trees, with that increasingly uncomfortable buzzing in my ears, the kind you'd probably hear if you stood beneath a giant power transformer, which was absurd given that I was way out in the park, miles from any power source. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I started trudging up the forest to the ridge. The stench got worse with each step. Not just the rotting garbage smell, but a sulfur-like odor now clung to it. This is where it gets hard to explain. I've always been a creature of instinct, entrusting my life to the silent language of the wilderness many times over. But what happened up at that ridge, I still struggle to comprehend. When I reached the crest, I saw them. They were humanoid shapes of maybe 4 to 6 feet tall. They were skinny, with disproportionately large heads and black oval eyes. No noses, no mouths. They were like something straight out of those alien conspiracy theories. There were about a handful of these grays, as people call them, stationed around what looked like some sort of metallic object. They seemed to be examining their surroundings silently, telepathically communicating maybe. I don't know. And that hum, it seemed to be emanating from them. Now, I won't lie, every nerve in my body screamed to bolt, but my feet became rooted to the spot, eyes glued to the unsettling spectacle before me. They reeked, the stink mixing with the wood's natural odor, overpowered everything else. I couldn't tell you how long I stood there, staring in abject horror, my heart pounding out a stuttering rhythm against my rib cage. It may have been seconds, or maybe hours, but then one of them turned, its black eyes seeming to look right at me, through me, and the hum intensified. It broke me out of my daze. I bolted. Somehow, don't ask me how, I made it back to my office. I was sweating buckets. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel each beat resonate through me. I locked myself in for the rest of the day, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was a figment of my imagination. But the bizarre condition of the trees and the residual humming in my ears told a different story. Once evening fell and the park grew quiet, I found myself replaying the day's events over and over in my mind, my sleep plagued by the image of those creatures and the haunting hum. Had I crossed paths with extraterrestrial life? Or was it some bizarre phenomenon of nature that I had yet to understand? Consequently, I resigned a month later, unable to shake off the lingering fear that came with working in the park. Discussions with other park rangers revealed no similar experiences, and I learned that the trees eventually recuperated from what looked like burn damage. Despite several sleepless nights and an enduring unrest, I consider myself lucky for having escaped unharmed. I'm still uncertain of what happened that day. All I can do is carry the haunting memories of those black, soulless eyes and the unceasing hum, always reminding me that something out there didn't belong to this world. I've been a park ranger at Channel Islands National Park for over 10 years now. The park is located off the coast of Southern California, near Los Angeles. I've amassed a number of strange stories over that time, but this takes the cake. Most of my tales are about strange people or usual wildlife encounters. All of them have some reasonable explanation in the end, except for this one. I try to watch out for the park and all of its inhabitants, human and animal. This happened during a routine patrol. Things took an unusual turn, to say the least. It was a fine, sunny day to start. That piece of paradise we call the Channel Islands was all shades of greens and blues. And against this backdrop of lush nature, there I was, doing my regular checks. Over the years, I've developed a rhythm for these patrols. I check on the wildlife trails we have tracked and maintain our remote cameras, while soaking in the serenity of the park and its unique landscape. This particular day was no different. The sun was warm, the gulls were loud, and the air was salty. The sea was calm as I patrolled along the remote section of the park. It was peaceful, so damn peaceful, considering what was to come. I remember gazing out at the expanse of the Pacific, watching a container ship in the far distance, and thinking how strange it was that two such worlds existed so close to each other. There was minimal activity in the woods that day, just some deer grazing and squirrels scurrying through the bushes. I was finishing up the day's checks, planning to head back when it happened. I wouldn't say I saw it first, but rather I felt it. A gust of a wind picked up, sending a chill down my spine. It was a cold that didn't belong in the sunny weather. The birds seemed to quieten, and a different form of silence took over. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating here, but when you've spent a good portion of your life in the wilderness, you learn to heed these signs from nature. I've always believed that our body speaks a language that's older than words, a primitive form of communication that taps into the instincts we hardly use in the civilized world. And my instincts were blaring sirens. Something was off. I scanned the area for what could have caused the sudden change. That's when I noticed ripples dancing across the otherwise still surface of the water. But they weren't like something caused by wind or a moving boat. It was as if something beneath the water was stirring it. As a seasoned ranger, I'm well versed with the diverse marine life around the islands, but this seemed different. I moved closer to the shoreline, curious and cautious. I saw a shadow in the water, a large one. It wasn't quite identifiable, neither a whale nor a school of seals, the usuals we get around here. There was a strangeness about it, something that unsettled the calm sea. This thing, whatever it was huge, its shadowy form undulating beneath the clear water. It seemed to glide, smoothly, purposefully. But before I could even make out more, it dived deeper into the sea, away from the coast and my prying eyes. You know the funny thing about such unexpected encounters? One moment, you're the watcher, the observer, the protector, and the next, you're nothing but a confused, curious bystander, trying to make sense of the strange hand you've been dealt. I thought that was the end of the wilderness's odd show, but it felt like the calm before a storm. Out of nowhere, a baffling sound cut through that silence. A bellowing roar, thunder-like and guttural, echoed off the surrounding cliff faces. But it wasn't your typical thunder. The sea and the wind carried an undertone of a growl, originating from the depths of the sea itself. This sound was like no marine or terrestrial creature I've come across in my years at the park. If I had to describe it, I'd say it was like the wrath of the ocean and the eternal wild all woven into one strange sound. I couldn't help but move closer, despite the building tension. My curiosity got the best of me. The ocean, which a moment before mirrored a sheet of glass, lashed and thundered, churning with bubbles and waves as if the seafloor was ablaze. It felt like an angry disturbance rippling through the sea's very soul. Suddenly, arcing out of the water, an enormous serpent-like creature rose up from the depths. This was not any known marine animal. It was titanic, easily dwarfing the nearby container ship I mentioned earlier. Outlined against the clear sky, its scale-covered body glistened in the sun. It had broad, fin-like appendages that it used to suspend itself above the waves. Its eyes were eerie, hypnotic even, but not in a gentle way. Rather, they carried an unsettling malice, a malevolent intelligence I've never seen in any animal's eyes before. The brine-filled air grew thick with stench. My nostrils were assaulted with a scent as old and distinct as the ocean itself mingled with something foul. The sheer terror of that sudden reveal made my heart race. But before I could react, with a thunderous thrash of its body, it dove back into the now raging waters, creating a whirlpool so fierce the whole shore trembled. Then, as suddenly as the creature had appeared, it was gone. Some might call it a monster, but I'd say it was just another citizen of the wild that we're yet to understand. In the following days, my thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter. It was like watching the park emerge from a shared dream, with the deer grazing, the foxes playing, the birds singing. Everything slipped back into its harmonic routine, as if the chaos was a forgotten echo. You know the best part about being a ranger? It's the privilege of witnessing nature's obscure tales, told by no humans but shared by the trees, the sea, the soil, and the air. This incident is another of these stories. Living at the edge of civilization brings such encounters, reminding us we've only begun to unravel the mysteries tucked away in this vast, beautiful wilderness. I've got a story for you. This one happened a couple of years ago. I'd recently started dating this girl, Lisa, and decided a picnic would be the perfect date. Living in the heart of Colorado, we had no shortage of beautiful nature spots to choose from. We ended up settling on this picturesque meadow surrounded by towering pines, about an hour outside of Denver. I'd spent the previous day stuffing a cooler with sandwiches, cheeses, and fruits. I tried to go all out. After all, Lisa was a city girl. She'd only just moved to Colorado, and I wanted to show her the relaxation of a laid-back, outdoorsy lifestyle. This meadow was perfect. It was like something you'd see on a postcard. We laid out the red blanket, started unpacking the food, and we're having a hell of a good day. The sun was beaming and there was just a hint of breeze. Lisa was laughing at my terrible impressions, and for a while everything was going well. Then, feeling the heat of the day, we both dozed off. I don't know how long we slept, but it was easily close to an hour. I remember being awoken by a sudden coldness, not just the kind of cold from a passing cloud blocking the sun. It felt unnatural, electrical almost. I stirred, sat up and rubbed my eyes, and that's when I first noticed it. A figure, lurking at the periphery of the meadow. It was a dark smudge against the vibrant colors. It was hard to make out any specific details from that distance, but something about it put me on edge, and a deep sense of dread clenched around my chest. Was it the way it seemed to hover just at the edge of the forest? The way it seemed somehow both solid and formless at the same time? The thing, whatever it was, stayed in my sight for the better part of an hour. We stayed close to each other on the blanket, whispering about how we were torn between an urge to flee and a weird curiosity that held us rooted to the spot. Admittedly, we were both freaked out but tried passing it off as a bear or some other wildlife. But the sense of unease stayed. It didn't help that the figure was unsettlingly man-like, but hazy, almost blurry. It was like looking through frosted glass. Our little relaxing picnic had been tainted by a sense of dread that was hard to shake off, at least as long as that thing was still there. Then began the sounds. Soft at first, a low hum that could easily be dismissed as the hum of insects or distant river, but it began to increase in volume, becoming a guttural, growl-like echo that seemed to resonate from both everywhere and nowhere. The last thing I remember is grabbing Lisa's hand and scrambling to our feet. Our abandoned picnic left as a sad little island of normality in a rapidly changing landscape of fear. Whatever it was, it stayed in my periphery, never allowing me to look at it directly. It was like a smudge in a pair of glasses that you can't ever clean, or a blind spot in your vision field. I remember Lisa muttering a low, scared, "What the hell is that?" Her voice barely audible over the unsettling growling. The shadow was growing larger. I don't know how, but it was significantly taller than it was a moment ago. And what I'd previously thought to be a trick of perspective appeared eerily like horns protruding awkwardly on its head. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that we had to get out of there. So with Lisa's hand gripped in mine so hard it hurt, we began running as fast as we could in the opposite direction. Lisa was sobbing now, terrified, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I don't know how I knew, but I knew if I looked back, that would be it. With a sense of dread, I could smell it now. A strong scent of sulfur and something burning. By the time we reached the safety of our car, the menacing figure had vanished. We jumped in, and I roared the engine to life. Lisa was shaking as she turned around, her eyes wide as saucers. "It's gone," she said. Looking back on that event has never been easy. We'd run away from something we didn't truly understand. We knew what we'd seen wasn't human. It wasn't natural. We had no proof, though. I still can't step foot in that meadow. But you want to know the scariest part? When we got back to my home, we found a black feather. The damn thing followed us home. We never saw that figure again. But the smell, that terrible sulfuric smell, I would get whiffs of it in the house for weeks. It finally faded. But the fear, well, the fear never goes away. I can't prove we met a demon that day, but what else could it be? Remember, not everything is as it seems, and sometimes a beautiful day can turn into your worst nightmare. Stay safe out there. My tale isn't your typical campfire ghost story, nor some elaborate urban legend. It's quite personal. Nothing I'd make up for giggles or internet clout. It was a couple of years back around midsummer. I took a vacation and decided to drive up to this secluded lake in Maine. It was a remote place, hardly any tourists, and just the perfect place for me to drop a line and catch some peace of mind along with the occasional trout. I've always been one for the serenity of the great outdoors. Fishing is like a form of meditation for me. I went on this adventure solo, which is something I do from time to time. But Dave felt different. I'm not usually bothered by the feeling of being alone in the vastness of nature, but I felt truly alone that time. Despite my odd feeling, the day began uneventfully. I arrived at the lake just past dawn and set up camp near the shore with all the right gear: my trusty old fishing rod, a six-pack of my favorite beer, my lucky fishing hat. As the sun rose higher, I enjoyed a couple of cold ones and cast my line out into the calm waters. The first couple of hours were incredibly peaceful, with nothing but the call of distant loons and a soft breeze to keep me company. Every so often, I'd reel in a decent-sized trout or two. It was shaping up to be an idyllic day. During lulls between catches, I remember losing myself in the soothing rhythm of the lapping waves against the shore and the scent of fresh water. At times, I thought I smelled something briny, almost salty, but I couldn't figure where it was coming from. It was strange, considering we were miles and miles away from the ocean. As the day wore on, I began to notice unusual movements on the water. Around my bobber, the water churned in odd patterns, like there were underwater currents where there shouldn't be. In the stillness of the lake, those ripples seemed out of place. I mean, every fisher knows the typical splash a fish makes, and let me tell you, this wasn't caused by a fish. It was something I've never come across before. Even stranger were the sounds that came with the twilight. The once peaceful symphony of the wilderness was punctuated with an occasional low rumble, like some distant thunder, that seemed to echo from the deepest parts of the lake. And yet, there were no signs of a storm on the horizon. I could have sworn that a gust of an unnaturally cold wind seemed to rise from the surface of the lake. On the first night, I brushed it all off as quirks of the secluded lake, or maybe the beer playing tricks with my senses. But little did I know that these were merely the subtle overtures to an encounter that was nothing short of ominous. The entire experience left me questioning the limits of the natural world. The next morning, a heavy fog blanketed the lake, something fairly typical for Maine. But as the first rays of dawn hinted at another beautiful day, the still water did seem unusually dark. It was as if the lake was reluctant to let go of the night. Regardless, I went about my morning routine, setting up my fishing gear while nursing a hot cup of camp coffee. Going by yesterday's plentiful catches, I shrugged off my misgivings and cast my line once more, expecting the gentle tug that indicated a biting trout. But the lake remained oddly still, too still for comfort. Time seemed to slow on that fog-drenched morning. The ever-present breeze was oddly absent, and the surface of the lake lay like a dark, flat mirror. It was then I noticed something stirring beneath the surface. Whatever it was massive. The water rippled in strange patterns. The lake came alive with a low, resonating hum that sent vibrations through the soles of my boots. For a fleeting moment, I saw something. Eyes glowing like underwater lanterns, fixing me with their hypnotic gaze. The immense shadow then shifted, causing a sudden swell in the water. With the grace and speed unexpected from a creature of its size, it dove deeper, leaving behind a visible whirlpool. The harsh reality of the situation hit me. I was not alone in this vast, isolated lake. There was a presence, a monstrous creature lurking in its depths, nudging at the edge of my reality. Panic surged through me and froze me in my tracks. Part of me wanted to pack up my gear and flee. The other part, a stupefied witness, was swallowing its fear and staying glued to the very spot. I wanted to see what it was. Eventually, survival instincts won. I grabbed as much of my gear as I could and quickly dismantled my makeshift camp, shoving everything into my car. As I glanced back at the lake, the fog had lifted, but the aura of trepidation hadn't. The lake, once my sanctum of peace, had become a source of nightmares. Driving back home, my mind raced, filled with the image of those glowing eyes and monstrous silhouette. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in the realm of a large predator. Later, hearing tales from other anglers, my chilling experience found me in company. Other people had seen this creature that inhabits this remote, seemingly serene lake. A charming summer getaway had turned into a visceral reminder of an unknown world, lurking beneath the tranquil facade of nature. Since then, I've kept my distance from the lake. Whenever I muster up the strength to revisit my memory, I'm left with a sense of foreboding. Despite the fear, though, there's a part of me, a stubborn fisherman part, that considers going back. Maybe one day I will. So, this happened about 5 years ago. The wife and I were out on one of our late-night drives. You know those types where you're just cruising along quiet roads where nobody else seems to be around? It was sort of our thing, to forget everyday life and just spend some time alone. It was peaceful, with the radio humming old tunes. The locations we went to were pretty remote. I can't exactly recall the name of the places we were offhand. We were just driving aimlessly. The road stretched on for ages, surrounded by dense woods on either side. I guess that's why we loved it, though. The feeling of being in a world of our own. We loved pointing out random things to each other and wondering what the people were doing inside their houses. By the way, if you've been married as long as I have, you'll understand that these little shared moments are precious. It was an unspoken agreement, a ritual that we always looked forward to. The dusk had already given way to a clear and starry night by the time we started out on our drive. The moon hung high. I would even go as far as to say that it was the perfect night, right up until it wasn't. We were approaching a sharp bend when I first noticed it. An acrid, pungent stench. You expect to smell damp earth, leaves, maybe a skunk if you're unlucky. But this was different. It was putrid. My wife noticed my discomfort and made a face, quickly rolling up her window. Now listen to me. As someone who's practically lived half his life in the woods, I've come across various kinds of smells. But this was something else entirely. Something wrong. And let me tell you, nothing good comes from that kind of smell. Just around the bend, I slowed down, trying to make sense of the rancid odor invading our peaceful night. Then we heard it, a guttural growl that seemed to reverberate in the still of the night. It was loud enough to hear over the sound of the truck's engine. My wife looked at me, her eyes wide, and honestly, I was probably mirroring her expression. The odd part was that whatever this creature was, it wasn't afraid of the truck or the headlights or my honking, or even my shouting at it to leave the damn road. I noticed a pair of glowing yellow eyes stare back from within the shadows that the pickup's headlights were reflecting. They were higher than what you'd expect from any four-legged forest animal. Maybe a bear standing on its hind legs? But I knew that couldn't be it. The instinctive chill of fear ran down my spine. God, you won't believe what it was that we saw next. The eyes started to move, sort of bouncing up and down, as if it was attached to something walking. We were transfixed. A silhouette appeared from the shadows, backlit by the glow of our headlights. Right then, the wife let out a terrified gasp beside me. The figure had an enormous width, broader than any man I'd ever seen. That wasn't what made it eerie, though. It was the shape that was downright freakish. The creature, it was like a dog, but it was standing upright. Its muscular arms hung down the sides, ending in what appeared to be elongated feet with noticeable claws that scraped across the blacktop. Its hunched back and powerful thighs only added to its beastly and grotesque silhouette. And oh God, the face, a long snout or muzzle, like a dog's elongated mouth, with yellow glowing eyes that glinted with a terrifying intelligence. It was watching us as we were watching it. I swear I could see drool dripping from its gnashing jaws. Seeing it walk, it seemed like it was hunched over, but stood upright nonetheless. Its legs were oddly similar to that of a canine, if dogs were designed to walk like men. I felt like I was in a nightmare. The creature was covered all over with tufts of thick fur, patches of it sticking out in some places more than others. Its hide was somewhere between black and dark brown, harder to discern with the dim glow from the pickup's headlights. My wife whispered, her words stuck, barely able to pass her trembling lips. Drive, drive now. But my hands were glued to the steering wheel. My eyes remained locked on the monstrosity, slowly trudging across the road, indifferent to our car, or even to the high beam pointed directly at it. I'm not sure how long we were sat there. Time seemed to have broken. Finally, the creature disappeared into the dense tree line, leaving behind the acrid stench and a sight that both of us would never be able to forget, or explain for that matter. We drove home that night, but silence swallowed the remaining duration of the journey. We fought to make sense of what we had seen back there, on the lonely country road, but neither of us had answers. In the subsequent weeks, I'd revisited that turn multiple times, but found nothing. We were never the same after that night. Every unseen pair of glowing eyes on the road at night, every unexplained movement in the woods, they all served as dreadful reminders of our encounter with that insane creature. It was also the night that our peaceful drives lost their tranquility forever.